Hi everyone, welcome to the Broken Hearts Book Club. I got this shirt from the brand out of print I think 6 or 7 years ago, and it's never been more relevant until this very moment. But it's already February of this year, which is honestly crazy. January has felt like both forever and also like it's gone by really fast. But as it is sort of the month of love, I have a bunch of book recs for you today about all kinds of broken hearts because love rarely goes well in the books that I enjoy, and this spans all kinds of love, romantic to platonic to even familial. So I think that everyone will find something to love within this list. I also want to mention it is Black History Month in the US as well, and so while I didn't intentionally necessarily compile a list of Black authors for this video, there are quite a few Black writers on this list and writers that I absolutely adore and love, and so I definitely recommend checking those out as well. With that being said, let's get right into the books. I grouped together the first couple of books on this list because they all show like really incredible depictions of romantic love and relationships. Obviously there's so many stories written about romantic love, but I feel like these ones actually show the essence of a true love, of maybe what love is in its best form. And although these stories are sort of painfully realistic, the depictions of relationships within them will get you sort of believing in love and wanting to love again. The first is Open Water by Caleb Azuma Nelson. I've talked about this before, but it's the story of two young artists, a photographer and a dancer who both live in London, and they're sort of trying to find their place within the city, within their craft, and also grappling with their Black identity. But I think Nelson's writing is particularly so beautiful and lyrical and also very emotional and raw, and I believe that this was written entirely in the second person, which was really interesting. And I would still quote this book as sort of being the most beautiful literary depiction of love that I've ever seen, which is a high bar, but I think it just really captured the intensity and beauty and also sadness of being in love so well. And it's quite a short read that flies by, so I definitely recommend it for this month. The next one is If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin. Y'all are probably tired of hearing me talk about Baldwin now, but this is actually one of my favorite of his books. The story is set in 1970s Harlem, and it's about two characters, Tish and Fonnie, who are about to get married and who are in love and everything until Fonnie gets unjustly arrested and then imprisoned. And it sort of follows their early love story, but then also them grappling with the reality of loving someone in a very sort of unjust and cruel world, as well as sort of depicts how the love integrates into the community around them. And I like that it showed the difference between sort of the woman's side and the man's side in that relationship, going through an incredibly difficult situation. And I think at the end of the day, Baldwin manages to sort of affirm the power and the hope of love while not ignoring sort of the injustices that go on. And it just becomes a very real sort of touching story. This is also a short one. It's, like I mentioned, one of my favorite Baldwins, and I think it's a great place to start if you haven't read any of James Baldwin yet. If we're talking about Baldwin and we're talking about relationships, I think Giovanni's Room is also essential to mention. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of it, but it's set in Paris, and it's about the love affair between two men. And it's also sort of like the artistic gay community in Paris at the time, but it's also about how their relationship sort of unravels. And although this one I think has a little bit less like warmth at the core than If Beale Street Could Talk, I think it's definitely one worth reading if you're interested in seeing how Baldwin depicts romantic relationships. It's very good. And a random classic favorite for this category that I haven't read in years, but I remember absolutely loving, and I think I definitely need to revisit. I know it's a fan favorite, but it's Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Heathcliff is, of course, the original fictional boyfriend, and if you're feeling something a little bit more moody and kind of dark romantic vibes, I definitely recommend that classic as well. The next couple of books I chose for their depictions of platonic love. I thought these sort of showed friendships really well and all the ups and downs and sort of the power of love between friends that I think needs to be talked about a lot more and is so interesting to read when done well. The first is, of course, the Neapolitan novel series. I've talked about this before on my channel, and I'm sure you guys have heard of them as well, but it's the story of two girls, Elena and Lila, and sort of their growth through Naples in, I believe, like the 50s or 60s. And it follows them from when they were basically children to until they become adults and have kids of their own, and shows us sort of the ups and downs of their friendship. And I think it is one of the best literary depictions of a female friendship, especially over time, that I've ever seen, and it's really fun to read about. I think as a reader you really feel the nuances of their friendship, of how they came from a very similar place but then had different paths in life, different marriages, different jobs, different social class, etc. And it delves into a lot of real aspects of female friendship that other books honestly are probably too scared to tackle. Next, we have Stay True by Hua Xu, and this is a memoir set in Xu's college years about his friendship with a boy named Ken, and it's sort of an exploration of male friendship, of Asian American identity, as well as sort of a love story to coming of age in the 90s in the Bay Area, which I thought was really well done. Like, the time and place feels incredibly alive. And it's not a spoiler to say that it also deals with grief and violence and the sudden loss of a friend, and so I think that was really beautiful to read. And I just think it's a really unique story and a great depiction of male friendship, which we don't often see in literature, and so I really enjoyed it. Next, we have Love by Roddy Doyle, and I gotta be honest, I didn't necessarily really enjoy this book, but I wanted to include it here if you guys are looking for sort of unconventional reads about different types of friendship, because this is about the friendship between two men in their 60s who meet at the pub. Honestly, just two Irish guys talking at the pub for most of the book, and I think that's why I didn't love it that much. It felt a little bit boring, but I also think it felt really refreshing in the literary sphere. We don't often see that kind of character nowadays, and like the title says, I think it writes about this sort of like special male friendship, specifically pop culture in the UK, whatever, with a lot of love, which I found really interesting. So if you guys are interested in any of those things, I would definitely recommend it. Lastly on this list is Sula by Toni Morrison, and I just talked about it in my sort of reads of 2024, like reading wrap-up video, so I won't spend too much time talking about it, but it follows two women, Nell and Sula, who are childhood friends and then go on completely different paths in their adulthood, and Sula in particular is sort of like a rebel and just kind of goes against what anyone tells her to do, and it's such a good depiction of friendship. I think it might be my favorite of Morrison's that I've ever read so far, so yeah, a book that I absolutely love. And next I have a longer list of books that just deal with all kinds of love. I included these because I think these are the best books, honestly, that don't focus on just one kind of love, but that show all sorts of relationships and all sorts of ups and downs and truly all sorts of broken hearts. All of these books are just infused with so much love for the characters, for the community, for the ways in which people relate to each other and are connected and entangled with each other. And a lot of them are just great meditations on how complex relationships can be, but also how beautiful. The first is Difficult Loves by Italo Calvino, and I've also talked about this book a couple of times, so I'm going to keep it short. But it's a book of short stories by Calvino that basically covers every single kind of love possible in sort of like a fable-like way. These stories that feel slightly surreal, almost magical realism-esque, but also told in sort of like a satirical way at times, and they're really fun to read. They're very short, so you could honestly read one every day, on the toilet or something, and it should go by pretty fast. I will put the title of one story that I honestly think you can skip over, just like trigger warning, not great vibes, but otherwise I thought it was amazing, and it's a book that really made me love Calvino more, so yeah. Oh, and I forgot to mention, along with Difficult Loves, the next three are also all short story collections, which I think are perfect because they really do depict all kinds of relationships and love. And the next is A Lucky Man by Jamil Brinkley. This is a fantastic short story collection about all kinds of relationships in modern day New York, particularly within changing communities. And he really focuses on all kinds of iterations of masculinity, particularly Black masculinity, and all the ways it sort of shows up in relationships, in families. But he writes with so much tenderness and love and care about each character. I loved reading this collection. I also love Jamel as a human being. He's one of my teachers at one point, and yeah, his writing is great, so I'd really recommend this collection. Next, another short story collection is Happy Stories Mostly by Norman Erickson Pasaribu, translated by Tiffany Sao. This is by an Indonesian writer, and the stories in here are so imaginative and honestly kind of wacky at times, but also grounded in very real emotions. They cover family, mother-son relationships, queer relationships, relationships with God and religion, and the best part is that all the stories are sort of, interrogating the title, like, is love really happy? Like, are these stories mostly happy stories? And I think that's really fun to read. And yeah, the writing is great, the translation is fantastic, and it's sort of a writer that I'd never heard about before, and I'm really excited to see more from. Next is After Parties by Anthony Viesnaso, who is one of my favorite writers of all time, and this is the collection that really solidified that position. It follows honestly all kinds of love, mother-daughter, father-son, community love, cousins even, as well as romantic relationships. But what I feel most honestly throughout all of these stories is a real love for the Cambodian American community that he writes about and that he's from in Stockton, California. And even though it's a collection of short stories, it kind of feels like episodes that are set in the same like fictional world of a TV show or something. Like literally the same stores keep popping up, the same figures throughout all these stories. They're all interconnected, it feels like. And even though you can kind of tell in the writing that Anthony Viesnaso himself had maybe a more complex relationship with his community as well, it just feels like the whole book was written with a desire to capture even sort of like a fraction of how like bright and vibrant and amazing this community is. And I think that's just really beautiful, and I really feel that it's like super alive. And in my very subjective opinion, his writing is the best I've ever seen of any contemporary literary writer. So yeah, if you're looking for a fresh voice, if you're looking for unforgettable characters and just really great stories that kind of fly by, I'd really recommend After Parties. Particularly The Three Women of Chuck Donuts is an incredible story, just honestly perfect, and hopefully you'll want to read more of his work afterwards. And now we have 5 novels to round off the list. First is another Toni Morrison novel. This one is called Love, and it centers around one character, Bill Cozy, who is a man who's just died in like this beach town, but it actually isn't about him at all. It's about the love that a bunch of women in his life felt for him, and sort of the differing iterations of that love. So we have his wife, his daughter, his employees, his sort of mistress, all that kind of fun stuff, and their sort of differing imaginations of him, as well as their interactions with each other that can get tense, but also that can get vulnerable. In classic Morrison fashion, it's such a crazy cool concept, and she completely delivers on it, and each of the characters feels incredibly real, and I think it's a really fun book to read if you're looking for some broken hearts. Next, we have Time of the Flies, which I've mentioned in 2 recent videos, so again, I'll keep it really short, but this is by Claudia Pinheiro, translated by Frances Riddle, and it's about 2 friends, Inez and Manka, who are both running a pest control business, but they get sort of involved in a crime. It's about everything that unfolds after that, and it's really about love between women, mothers and daughters, friends and lovers, and also the more complex aspects of those relationships, and all that is done in sort of like the suspenseful mystery novel genius of Pinheiro. Next, we have Love in the Big City by Sang-Young Park, translated by Anton Her. This follows a queer Korean main character throughout sort of his 20s as he lives with his best friend, as he goes through a series of romantic relationships and sort of the fallout of those, and it also shows us the relationship between him and his mom. But all of these are portrayed with incredible realism and yet a lot of energy and love for each other, and sort of like this world of being young, seeking love, feeling lonely, and sort of that toggle between like the momentary joy of love and then also the fact that life changes and goes on and people change. And yeah, it's one of my favorite works of Korean literature, and so I definitely recommend it. Next, we have the one book that I have in person with me, and otherwise I apologize. I don't actually have that many physical books here in Seoul. A lot of them are back in the US, or in general, I'm trying to read more on my Kindle and borrow from the library. Hopefully you guys on this channel are okay with that. But we have Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. If you guys haven't heard of this yet, this is the story of 2 brothers, Ivan and Peter, and sort of the complexity and awkwardness of the love between brothers, as well as grief within a family, and it also deals with a lot of different versions of romantic love. In particular, this sort of explores a big age gap relationship, which I think is interesting and not done that much in contemporary literature, so I thought that was really cool. Yeah, you can watch my sort of reading Intermezzo vlog if you're curious about my specific thoughts on this book, but I did enjoy it quite a bit, and I do think it's a really great exploration of different kinds of love if you're interested and if you like Sally Rooney's writing. Lastly, we have a book that I don't think I've recommended in a long time on this channel, but I do really love, and it's Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. This book kind of falls into the slight trope of like a suburban woman is just trying to get through her life and a lot of stuff is going on and she's not feeling very mentally well trope, if you guys know what I'm talking about. And honestly, I don't tend to love those books very much because they feel kind of forced and like they're just sort of playing up mental illness, honestly, for the sake of mental illness, which I don't think is that great. But this book shows the realities of that experience so incredibly well. It talks about how overwhelming daily life can be and how hard it can be to just feel joy being alive in our modern world, but also paints a very real picture of family relationships, of marriage, and I think fundamentally it's a book about self-love. And honestly, I was blown away by the humor in this book. It made me laugh out loud, which is honestly very rare, and it's just so smart. Like, the humor is exactly my kind of humor. It's quite sarcastic and almost like tongue-in-cheek, but also so real and makes you reflect on your own life as well. But the book as a whole is very sort of thoughtful and at times heartbreaking. And I feel like the fact that both incredible joy and humor and also incredible sadness and difficulty lie at the heart of this book is what set it apart from all other books in the trope for me. So yeah, if you're looking for a really fast, fun, but also meaningful read, I'd really recommend Sorrow and Bliss. So yeah, with that, I think that concludes our meeting of the Broken Hearts Book Club. I hope you guys are excited about some of these recommendations, and honestly, I did this for February, but we can read books about love any time of the year, and actually they are probably my favorite books to read, period. So obviously don't feel the pressure to read all of these in the next month. Let me know what books you're thinking of adding to your TBR list, and if you have any of your favorite books about love that you'd like to recommend to me for the next month or so. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll be back soon with a new video. Bye!